The first scream didn't even sound human. At first it was just a low moan, like wind squeezing through a broken pipe far down the hallway. But then it grew louder and sharper, changing into a sound that felt like it was drilling straight into my skull. The lights above us flickered like they were about to burst, and I felt the air in death row turn ice cold, as if someone had opened a giant freezer all around us. I was standing right in the middle of the cell block, trying to keep my camera steady even though my hands were starting to shake. My name is Alex, and I thought I was just filming a horror documentary about the most haunted prison in America. I thought this was going to be another creepy location for the channel. But the way that scream rolled through the cell block, it felt less like a sound, and more like the building itself was remembering something terrible and forcing us to listen. Behind me, Tyler was holding the boom mic, his big headphones pressed tight over his ears so he could catch every sound. I saw his face change. He went from focused to frozen in 1 second. His eyes got wide, and all the color left his cheeks. He didn't move, like he was afraid that if he even breathed too loud, something would notice him. "Alex," he whispered, and even his whisper sounded scared. "They're all screaming." I turned slowly, my camera still rolling. Every single cell door on death row was locked. Every cell I could see was empty. No inmates, no guards, no living bodies at all. Just rust, dust, and darkness. But the sound was clearly coming from inside the cells. It was like dozens of invisible throats were ripping themselves apart, all at the same time. The metal bars began to rattle, one after another, like invisible hands were grabbing them from the inside and shaking them as hard as they could. My camera shook in my hands as the floor itself seemed to vibrate beneath my feet. It felt like the whole building was waking up just to scream at us for being there. "Maya, you getting this?" I yelled down the hallway. Maya, our second camera operator, was standing near the execution chamber door at the far end of death row. Her face was pale in the glow of her camera light. The beam from her rig cut through the dust, stretching long shadows along the floor like black fingers reaching toward us. "I'm getting it," she said, but her voice shook. "Alex, we need to go. Now." She wasn't just scared. She sounded like her body was already begging her to run. And then, just as suddenly as it started, the screaming stopped. It didn't fade out. It just cut off, like someone hit a switch. The hallway fell into a thick, heavy silence. I could hear the buzzing of the old lights overhead and the slow drip of water from somewhere out of sight, but nothing else. No footsteps. No breathing. No voices. Then we heard it. One single voice. "Clear. Close." "Alex." It came from the cell right beside me. It wasn't loud, but it felt way too close, like someone was pressing their mouth against my ear. I spun toward the sound and pointed my light through the bars. The cell was completely empty. No one there. No one hiding. Just that feeling that I was not alone. "Alex," the voice whispered again. "I know your real name." Every hair on my body stood up, because no one here should know that name. Not in this town. Not in this prison. That name belonged to a part of my life I had almost forgotten. Before I could process what I just heard, the light above my head popped and went out, dropping my side of the hallway into almost total darkness. The only real light left was coming from Maya's camera at the far end, which turned her into a moving spotlight in a tunnel of black. I stood in the heavy shadow, feeling like something had just stepped between me and the only exit. Tyler's voice crackled through the walkie, cutting through the silence with shaky static. "Alex," he whispered, panic obvious in his tone, "the cameras are picking up movement. But there's nobody there." My mouth felt dry. "Where?" I asked. "All of them," he said. "Cell block D solitary. Death row. They're not empty anymore." Before I could answer, I felt it, a cold breath on the back of my neck, not like air from a vent, but like a person standing right behind me. A voice leaned in, warm and cruel. "Welcome back," it said. "We've been waiting for you." The camera in my hands shook so hard I almost dropped it. For a second, my mind just went blank. I thought this was the moment everything ended. But that night, as terrifying as it was, wasn't really where this story began. That was the moment things exploded. The dark history of this place had started long before we ever walked in with cameras, lights, and microphones. The truth began many years earlier, on a quiet road leading to an empty, rotting building, the most haunted prison in America. I didn't know it yet, but I'd been tied to this place since I was a kid. As we drove toward the prison that evening, the sky was painted in orange and purple, and the trees along the road stood bare and twisted like old hands reaching for the van. Tyler was driving. Maya sat in the front seat with a smaller camera, recording every mile. I sat in the back, checking battery levels and cleaning my main lens, trying to ignore the tight knot in my stomach. "All right," Tyler said, trying to sound casual. Intro take 1. 3 friends walk into the most haunted prison in America, and only 2 walk out. Maya shot him a look. "Not funny," she muttered. I forced a small smile. "It's a little funny," I said, even though my body didn't feel like laughing. The prison slowly rose up ahead of us, huge and silent, like a sleeping giant waiting to wake up. Raven Hill State Penitentiary. The brick walls were dark and cracked, the watchtowers empty, and the main gate was eaten up by rust and ivy. Broken windows stared down at us like dead eyes watching fresh prey. We parked near an empty guard booth, where the wind whistled through broken chain-link fence. Somewhere far off, a crow cawed. I stepped out of the van, feeling the cold air bite at my skin, lifted my camera, and hit record. "My name is Alex Carter," I said, walking toward the lens. "Tonight, with my team, we're stepping inside the most haunted prison in America." I told the camera this was a place with a history so dark that many people believed it never really shut down. The prisoners might be gone, but their ghosts might not be. Maya gave a small nod behind the camera. "Good take." We moved toward the front entrance, where a heavy metal door stood half open. When I pushed it wider, it groaned like it was complaining about being disturbed. Inside, the air smelled like dust, mold, and something sour and old. The entry hall was full of shadows and floating dust, lit only by the last weak light of the fading sun behind us. "Creepy level 10, Tyler whispered. "It's only going to get worse," I answered. And I was right, because we weren't alone. Waiting just inside the entrance was a man in his late 60s, wearing a worn brown jacket and carrying a flashlight. His gray hair, lined face, and sharp eyes told me he'd seen a lot more of this place than we ever would. "Alex?" he asked. "Yes, sir," I said. "You must be Officer Harris." "Retired Officer Harris," he corrected. "I worked here 30 years. I know every corner of this place. And every story." We followed Officer Harris deeper into the prison. Every step we took echoed off the old floors, bouncing off rusty pipes running along the ceiling. The paint on the walls peeled away in long strips, and a crooked visitor's sign hung by one broken chain. This building looked like it had been abandoned, but it felt like it was still listening. "This place opened in 1912, Harris began, his voice steady but low. "Back then, they said it was the strongest prison in the state. Thick walls. Cold cells. No easy way out. The worst of the worst came here." Maya filmed his face and the hallway behind him as he talked. "In the early days, it wasn't just about locking people up," he went on. "It was about breaking them." We passed a room filled with broken tables and overturned chairs. "Some guards did their jobs," he said. "Some enjoyed it a little too much. The warden, Henry Cole, believed fear kept order. He didn't care what happened to the men in these cells as long as they didn't cause trouble." "Did a lot of people die here?" I asked. Harris lifted his flashlight and pointed it toward the darkness above us. "Over 100 confirmed deaths," he said. "And that's just the number they were willing to write down. Fights, riots, executions, accidents, suicides." He paused on that last word, like he didn't fully believe it. "But if you ask the old-timers, they'll tell you there were more. A lot more. Bodies that were never counted. Stories that were never told." We finally reached the main cell block. Rows and rows of cells rose up on both sides, stacked 3 levels high. The metal bars were eaten by rust, the catwalks above us were thin and shaky, some railings missing entirely. Everything felt tight, crowded, and trapped. "Some people say you can hear the old prisoners breathing in here at night," Harris said quietly. "Others say if you stay long enough, they'll start to call your name. Tyler shifted uneasily. Can they not? He muttered. We all laughed nervously, but the sound didn't last. We filmed for hours as the sun went down. We walked through the cafeteria, where long tables were overturned and trays still lay scattered on the floor like lunch had been interrupted and never finished. We moved through the showers, where no water ran anymore but the smell of old moisture and mold clung to the air. We passed the infirmary, where rusty beds and yellowed bandages lay in corners like the past had been left there to rot. Most of that time, nothing big happened. These were the low parts of the night, creepy but quiet. Every now and then, though, something small would remind us that we weren't alone. A door moved slightly on its own, even though there was no breeze. A distant bang echoed down a hallway we hadn't walked yet. The temperature would suddenly drop, our breath puffing white in front of us, then slowly rise again. It felt like the prison was watching us, deciding what it wanted to show us. That was our first day. But the real horror was still waiting for us in the dark. We left for a few hours to grab some food and check into a small motel in town. The place had old carpet, a flickering neon sign, and a vending machine that barely worked, but it had power and a bed, and right then that was enough. We sat shoulder to shoulder on the bed, huddled around my laptop, reviewing the footage we'd shot inside Raven Hill. Pause it, Maya said suddenly. I tapped the space bar. The frame on the screen showed us walking past the main cell block. Harris was talking, I was looking up at the upper tier, and Tyler was behind us. What is it? I asked. Maya pointed at the far left corner of the frame. My heart skipped. Behind the bars of an empty cell, there was a shape. Tall. Thin. Dark. Standing perfectly still. No face. No details. Just a shadow of a man watching us. I didn't see anyone up there today, Tyler said. Neither did I whispered. We rewound it. Played it again. Again. Every time, the shadow was there. We hadn't heard a step. We hadn't seen a thing. But the camera had. Okay, I said finally, trying to sound calmer than I felt. So, we definitely have something. Maya looked at me, her eyes wide but shining with that filmmaker excitement. We're still going back tonight, right? She asked. I swallowed. I already knew the answer. Yeah, I said. We are. That shadow is exactly why people will watch this. We drove back to the prison just before midnight. The sky had turned pitch black, thick clouds swallowing the moon. In the dark, the prison looked even worse, like a broken monster hunched at the end of the road. Officer Harris met us again at the entrance. You sure you kids want to be in here at night? He asked. Place is different when the sun goes down. We need the night shots, I told him. For the documentary. We'll be careful. He studied my face for a long moment, then nodded slowly. All right, he said. I'll stay in the old control room and keep an eye on things. You holler if you need help. But just so you know, if something wants you here, I might not be able to get you out. We set up our cameras in 4 key locations, one in the main cell block, one in the cafeteria, one in solitary, the hole, and one on death row. Each camera had night vision. Tyler checked the audio lines and tapped the mics, while Maya tested the lights and double-checked batteries. The air inside the prison felt heavier than before, like the building itself was holding its breath and waiting. We started the night in the control room with Officer Harris. He sat in front of a row of dusty monitors that once showed live feeds from all over the prison. Now the screens were dark and dead, reflecting only our flashlights. So, I said, pointing my camera at him, tell us about the worst night in this prison's history. Harris sighed and looked down at his hands, like he was about to open a door he'd tried to keep shut for years. It was 1987, he began. Summer night. Heat so bad the walls were sweating. Inmates were angry. Said yard time got cut. Said the food was worse than usual. Nobody listened. Nobody ever did. There was one inmate, Harris continued. Name was Eli Ward. They said he killed a store owner during a robbery. Eli swore he didn't do it. Said he was framed. He wrote letters, begged for someone to look at his case, to check the security tapes. No one cared. Maya and I listened closely while Tyler leaned against the door, keeping an eye on the hallway behind us. The night before his execution, Harris said, there was a power failure. Whole building went dark. When the lights came back on, one of the guards was dead in Eli's cell. Neck broken. Nobody could explain how. Eli was chained to the floor. His hands never left the cuffs. But that guard, Harris paused. He looked like he'd been thrown across the room. A cold breeze slipped through the control room, making my skin prickle. Next day, they executed Eli anyway, Harris went on. The warden didn't care. Said it was God's will. After that, things changed. Guards heard footsteps behind them when they walked alone. Inmates said someone whispered in their ears at night. People saw a tall shadow at the end of the hall, watching. Eli was dead. But it felt like he never left. He looked straight into my camera. And every year on the same night, the night he died, something bad happens in this place. As he finished, the dead monitors behind him flickered. Static crawled across the screens like white noise coming back to life. Slowly, one of the monitors changed. What the? Tyler breathed. On that screen, we saw the main cell block. Except it wasn't empty. Shapes stood inside the cells. Tall, thin shadows, some sitting on bunks, some standing at the bars, some pacing. Inmates that weren't supposed to exist anymore. Maya stepped closer to the monitor. Alex, are those old recordings? I asked. Harris shook his head. System's been dead for years, he said. There's no tape. No power to those cameras. On the screen, one of the shadows turned and looked straight at the lens. Then, like it could somehow see through the monitor into the control room with us, it raised one hand and waved. The screen snapped back to static.